say that the market is open right now. A small-scale turbine, wind turbine owners right now get nothing for the extra energy that's put into the grid. So how is the market open?
Well, as I indicated earlier, I gave an example of 60 megawatts a year are already being purchased at roughly 7 cents per kilowatt hour, and
all with the close eye of Nova Scotia Power, and they've been involved in the entire thing.
20 or
it's not
25
really
years.
Independent.
You want to play?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So a 20 to 25-year contract at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, I think, is pretty attractive, and what we need is more of those contracts.
There's something that I don't understand about renewables. In the case of tidal power, the power generation peaks every 6 hours, so you get this up and down, and then with wind, it tends to be windier during the day than it is at night. How do you balance the grid if 25% or some large target is renewable?
Yeah, and the term is called intermittent, and that's the whole point. It's difficult to go to 100% renewable, one type of renewable. There has to be some sort of backup power source, whether it's bringing in power from Lower Churchill or New Brunswick or wherever. There are other ways that you have to back it up when nature decides to shut it down.
Yeah, the whole system is in transition. At the moment, we simply don't have the capacity in place, and it's going to be some time before we have the capacity in place to do 100% renewables out of our own local geography in our province. But we are moving towards that, and that will probably happen at some point. But in the meantime, probably the core of the system will probably be hydroelectricity brought in from the Lower Churchill or from one of the other provinces. But that's probably going to be the core, while we are developing all of the alternatives that are going to feed in and that we will ultimately rely on. It's really a transition, and we have to expect that that's going to take some time, but it's pretty clear that every serious thinker who looks at it knows that 50, 75 years from now, we're not going to be burning coal in large generating plants in order to get our electricity. That's just not the way of the future.
So David, this question will fall to you first. In Nova Scotia, just under 1/2 of our greenhouse gas emissions come from 5 large power generating stations. The Nova Scotia Department of the Environment has produced a discussion paper recommending greenhouse gas caps for power generation beginning in 2010 with a 25% reduction by the year 2020. Will your government apply these caps on Nova Scotia Power emissions beginning in 2010, beginning next year?
Absolutely, and they're going to ramp up in from 2010 to 2015 to 2020 until we get the 2.5 megaton reduction from Nova Scotia Power. That's the whole plan, but of course you don't just jump in and do this without having proper discussion, make sure what's the art of the possible, and we're well pleased that this can be done, and absolutely we're in the process of producing those regulations.
Yes, we have to implement the caps on Nova Scotia Power, but I think it brings to attention the I think it's inevitable that we're going to have a cap and trade system eventually, with our closest neighbor, President Obama, talking about a cap and trade system. So I think we want to really look at forcing Nova Scotia Power into these caps, but also if they don't meet those caps, what can they trade for so that they don't have to meet it, because we know that they will probably do what makes the best sense to their finances and not necessarily Nova Scotians.
Jane.
Thank you. Well, there's not much divergence in the answer on this question, and the answer would be yes, but let me also say that it is my understanding that the infrastructure bringing power from the Lower Churchill Falls would land at Lingan, and if my information is correct, that replacing that generating plant, that the biggest, the dirtiest coal-fired generating plant with power from Lower Churchill, if we can land an agreement in the area of 500 to 600 megawatts, then that would do the job to replace that biggest, dirtiest coal-fired generating plant. Thank you.
Yeah, so the answer is clearly yes, that this system of greenhouse gas emission caps, along with the other kinds of caps on emissions, nitrous oxides, mercury, particulate matter, all of those things are already starting to be in place, and we would certainly abide by that target and that guideline. So that's exactly where we would expect Nova Scotia Power to go. It's clear that burning coal is a bad business to be in. I think Nova Scotia Power knows that. They don't want to be in the business of owning coal-fired generating plants, and that's why they've been trying desperately to morph themselves into a different kind of company that is generating by other means and that is owning electricity companies elsewhere in North America. They're trying to get out of that business. There's just no doubt about it, and cap and trade is certainly what's going to happen.
25% seems to me to be a very conveniently round number. It's a quarter. Why not choose another one? Why not 50%? I'll just throw that to everybody.
Okay. In fact, if you look at the kinds of numbers that are being thrown out now by people like, I think it's Sir Nicholas Stern, who was the British economist who looked at the necessity for even much more aggressive targets. That's a target that's talked about for 2020, but people are talking now about targets for 2050 and 2075 and 2080, and the kinds of reductions that they're talking about are on the order of 60%, 70%, 80% of greenhouse gas reductions, and those are targets that we're going to have to start thinking about. They weren't included in the Environmental and Sustainability Act that came out last year, which was kind of looking still fairly short term. We have to look at that 50 to 75 year time horizon and begin to realize that we have to move very aggressively and have very high targets that are going to be very difficult to meet unless we begin to take this seriously.
Yes, I believe the number is 80%. Once we get, this is greenhouse gas reductions, once we hit the 2020 target, that's just the start. I mean, that we're trying to learn how to do this and get it in place. But ultimately, I'm advised that the scientists say that we have to have about an 80% reduction in order to just balance out what we're doing to the climate. So we have a long way to go, and you got to take the first step.
I'm not one who normally says nice things about Stephen Harper, but let me say that the federal Conservatives have actually just recently announced a good program. They said that coal-fired electricity generating plants will not be allowed to be rebuilt after the end of their existing life unless they meet very stringent greenhouse gas emission standards. And that's a warning particularly relevant to us in Nova Scotia and to a lesser extent in Alberta, where they also, believe it or not, burn a lot of coal. But that's a message for us here, and Nova Scotia Power and we as the public here have to hear that message, and it's one that's going to impact on us enormously here.
I think when we talk about caps and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, I think one thing we have to pay very close attention to is where the baselines are coming from. We see in the Kyoto Accord, I believe the baselines were from 1993. 1990, and we have to understand where these baselines are coming from, because we often see it's skewed sometimes. I've seen a lot of different baselines in different reports, so it's kind of like when you see a public opinion poll for politics, you got to look at how many people were polled and what the confidence level of the poll were.
Thank you. Your question is why not 30% instead of 25%? I just sort of lost the thread of it there, but that is your question. Is that?
Well, why choose 25% of the target?
Well, I think in choosing any targets, one has to look at what is reasonably doable within the time frame that is identified, and the Liberal Party is satisfied that with the targets that we've just spoken about, that they are in fact doable, and that is the basis on which we go forward on that position.
Thanks, everyone. So, Brendan, this question falls to you first. The Churchill Falls hydropower development would become accessible to Nova Scotia, or could become accessible to Nova Scotia via a power line or power lines across the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The primary goal of these lines would be selling electricity to the northeastern United States. How would you secure Nova Scotia's access to this hydropower without paying the higher power rates or matching those higher power rates that are currently there in the northeastern U.S. market?